Okay, welcome everyone to the deep dive.
Great to be diving in again.
So you've brought us some really interesting sources today.
Yeah, focusing on something absolutely fundamental to economics, scarcity.
Right. And our mission really for this deep dive is to unpack what these sources are saying. We want to pull out the most, important nuggets of knowledge.
And explore the surprising facts, the insights they contain, especially where this concept of scarcity bumps up against something huge like artificial general intelligence, AGI.
And even looking ahead to, well, AUI, artificial universal intelligence, potentially paradigm shifting stuff.
Definitely. Because scarcity, I mean, people often call it the cornerstone of economic theory, don't they?
That simple idea, our desires are basically infinite, but the resources we have, they're limited.
Exactly. And that fundamental tension, well, it drives so much of human behavior, so much economic activity.
It really does. And these sources you've shared, they pose this incredibly timely question, I think. If AGI and AUI can drastically change the means we use to satisfy our desires, could they actually challenge, maybe even, eradicate scarcity itself?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the $0 question, eventually. And these sources, they offer some really thought-provoking angles.
So AGI, that's the human-level general intelligence across lots of tasks.
Right, and AUI is that hypothetical next step, vastly beyond human capabilities.
Uh,
The sources introduce these as technologies that could potentially rewrite the economic rulebook.
Okay, so maybe let's start by really getting to grips with scarcities or sources define it. There's one quote you flagged, Peter Jacobson.
Yeah, he frames it as this relationship between people, what they want, and what's available. Humans just want more than they can possibly have with the means available right now.
And that limitation, that gap, is the engine of economic life.
Exactly. The core argument in the sources is pretty stark. Without scarcity, you essentially don't need economic action. I mean, if you could instantly manifest anything you wanted, the usual incentives work, trade, prioritizing things, they just wouldn't operate in the same way, would they?
Yeah, the whole system changes. Although one source did offer a bit of nuance there, didn't it?
It did. It suggested that while scarcity is crucial for economics, it might not be the only driver for all human behavior.
Right, like laughing or showing love. Those aren't necessarily about a lack of resources.
That's a fair distinction. It keeps the focus squarely on the economic side for this discussion. And the real disruptive element the sources introduce here is this idea of AGI enabling, well, near zero cost production.
Ah, yes. That phrase really stood out to me. Near zero cost production.
It's where the economic landscape starts to look radically different.
The sources use the example we see already, like digital goods, an ebook, an audiobook.
Perfect example. Once you've done the initial work, the creation, making copies and sending them to millions, the cost is practically nothing.
Almost zero. So the scarcity there isn't really in the copying, it's more in the original idea, maybe, or the intellectual property rights.
Exactly. And the really intriguing leap these sources make is asking, could AGI push this near zero cost thing into the realm of physical goods?
And they use a great, very relatable example for that. Housing.
Yeah, housing is such a classic example of scarcity, isn't it? Usually driven by limited resources, especially land in desirable spots.
We always say, not everyone can have a mansion downtown because there just isn't enough land.
But the sources really push on this. They ask, what if really advanced AGI powering new tech allowed us to design and maybe even like 3D print or construct housing structures almost anywhere?
Maybe even building land somehow.
Yeah.
In the sky or underground or who's
And provocative, right? Completely shifts the constraint.
It does. The limit stops being the naturally scarce land and becomes what? Access to the technology,
Yeah.
the raw materials.
Precisely. If AGI can optimize everything, design, resource use, automate complex construction, the cost for each house, each unit, could plummet, maybe towards zero.
Which, as the sources point out, would have absolutely profound implications for things like wealth and class, the way society is structured.
Huge implications. If material things, possessions become incredibly cheap, widely available, how do people even signal status or wealth anymore?
That was a fascinating nugget from the sources, yeah.
Yeah.
They speculate it might shift towards things that can't be easily replicated at zero cost.
Like what?
Unique experiences, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Real personal connections, exclusive communities, or perhaps intellectual achievements, things you can't just copy.
Which is interesting, but it doesn't necessarily mean power dynamics just vanish, right?
No, the sources are pretty clear on that. They caution that whoever controls the AGI controls the advanced production, the supply chains for raw materials.
They could end up wielding immense influence, shaping society in new ways, perhaps still very uneven ways.
It's more a shift in where the power comes from, not necessarily making it disappear.
Well put. And this potential for near instant, super low cost creation brings up another challenge, the sources flag.
Which is,
Well, today, if you want to do something big, build a bridge, or unfortunately build a weapon, it takes significant resources, coordination, effort.
scarcity acts as a kind of natural break, in a way.
Right. But the sources point out AGI could dramatically lower those barriers. If designing complex things, even potentially harmful things, becomes incredibly easy for just one person using AGI.
That puts immense power into individual hands. It raises huge questions about, well, unintended consequences or even malicious use.
It highlights a potential vulnerability, definitely, in a world with that kind of creative power just readily available.
But okay, the sources don't just leave us in sci-fi land. They quickly ground this potential abundance back in, well, basic physics.
Yes, they remind us that true, absolute zero-cost production runs into some hard fundamental limits.
The big ones being,
Conservation of matter and energy. You simply cannot create something from nothing.
right, no free lunch, physically speaking.
Any physical product, no matter how cleverly AGI designs or makes it, always needs some input. Raw materials, energy to transform them. That's a non-negotiable physical cost.
And then there's entropy.
Ah, yes, the universe's tendency towards disorder. Even the most advanced AGI-run factories or systems, they'll need maintenance, repairs, eventual replacement.
Things just break down, wear out. That's a fundamental law, and it always involves costs, resources, energy.
Definitely. Plus, the sources look really far ahead, thinking about hypothetical tech beyond even AGI, maybe space-time manipulation, building Dyson spheres, interstellar stuff.
Things requiring truly astronomical amounts of matter and energy.
Exactly. And even in a vast universe, just accessing and harnessing resources on that cosmic scale, that presents its own form of scarcity defined by, well, the sheer physics involved.
So the takeaway seems to be, while AGI could push costs incredibly low for many things, maybe astonishingly low.
These fundamental physical laws mean true, absolute zero cost across the board for everything. Probably impossible.
Scarcity tied to basic physical resources, energy, that seems likely to stick around in some form.
Which then leads the sources into this really fascinating territory. What happens to us, to human behavior, to society, if material scarcity is dramatically reduced, but maybe doesn't vanish entirely?
Because so much of human cooperation, historically, has been driven by shared struggle, right? Dealing with limitations together.
Building that bridge, like you said, developing a vaccine, exploring space. These huge projects need collective effort because no one person has all the resources or knowledge.
But if AGI makes it possible for individuals, or maybe just small groups, to achieve monumental tasks on their own,
Do the incentives for broad cooperation change? For building communities? It's a really compelling question the sources raise.
and if our basic physical needs are met much more easily, humanity might face a totally different kind of challenge.
What kind of challenge?
Finding meaning, maybe, purpose. The sources explore this idea of a kind of spiritual or psychological scarcity emerging.
Ah, I like that framing. The scarcity shifts inward, so to speak.
From physical goods to something existential. And what about opportunity cost? Another core economic idea.
How so?
Well, if resources aren't the main constraint, if you could theoretically pursue almost every desire or project simultaneously, does the act of choosing even lose its weight, its significance?
That's a deep thought. It suggests that even if material limits loosen up, other limits are finite time, our limited attention, maybe our capacity for truly unique experiences, those could become the new boundaries.
The things that shape our decisions and define what's actually valuable to us.
So the sources really push you to consider what does hold value in that potential future.
If piling up material stuff becomes less relevant,
Do things like creativity, genuine human connection, unique personal growth, do those become the prime commodities?
it seems like a logical shift
Yeah.
based on what the sources explore.
It does.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
This deep dive into your sources has been really illuminating. The core tension seems crystal clear, which on one hand, AGI and AUI hold this incredible potential to just completely revolutionize economics, driving down production costs dramatically.
Expanding access to goods, services in ways we can barely imagine right now, fundamentally altering our relationship with production and consumption.
Absolutely. But then on the other hand, as your sources really emphasize, this isn't some magic wand. Physics doesn't just go away.
Right. Those fundamental laws, conservation of matter, energy, the inevitability of entropy.
Plus the potentially immense resource demands of whatever future tech comes next.
It all means that true, absolute zero-cost production, the complete vanishing of scarcity, probably not happening.
It seems unlikely. Instead, scarcity itself might just evolve.
Yeah, change its shape. What is scarce could shift dramatically, maybe away from basic material things.
Towards things that are inherently limited or hard to replicate, like those unique experiences we talked about, or deep relationships.
Or perhaps even finding that sense of individual purpose, meaning in a very different world.
And this potential shift, this transition, it brings really significant societal challenges, which the sources definitely highlight.
Like ships and power dynamics, who controls this new advanced tech?
Navigating the risks when creation, maybe even destruction, becomes almost trivially easy.
The potential impact on human cooperation, community bonds.
And that really profound human challenge, how do we find purpose? How do we structure our lives if basic needs are largely taken care of?
It paints a picture of a future with, incredible promise, but one that also requires us to think very seriously about how we adapt as individuals and as a whole society.
Definitely. So let's leave our listeners with maybe one final provocative thought that came out of your sources.
Okay.
History shows us, again and again, that when power and resources become highly concentrated, there's a significant potential for misuse. Things can go wrong.
That's certainly true.
So given the absolutely unprecedented power that AGI could potentially unleash, are we as a society truly ready? Are we prepared to handle the potential abundance and the profound changes it will bring responsibly?
Yeah. That's the critical question, isn't it?
Something to really think about as these technologies continue to race forward.